So the lesson is called Sophistry, and we'll explain the term sophistry a little bit. But basically, it's an idea or an argument that sounds like a good argument. The person puts together a bunch of things that they sound good and they sort of make sense, but there's something wrong with them. And that's what Paul is talking about in Colossians, because the Colossian church is facing a bunch of people who are teaching things that sound good, but they really aren't good. And Paul refutes that and tells them how to deal with that. So Colossians 2 is, Paul is contending for the faith, as he almost always has to do in the letters that he writes. And we have to do the same thing in our own lives too. There are lots of people teaching wrong things. We were talking about some of them earlier. So these teachers in Colossae, which is the name of the city that these Colossians came from, are teaching man-made observances. And they're teaching things about them that sound logical and sensible and even godly sometimes. But Paul isn't going to directly address what they're teaching. He's going to teach us kind of a more general idea of how do you deal with other teachings and things that are new and novel. Sorry. So we don't know exactly what's going on because of that. We don't know what's being taught by these groups. It does seem like there's more than one group teaching things, and he's kind of addressing all of them at one time. And Jews do seem to be a part of it, because there's some things here that sound definitely like Jewish people teaching even novel things on Judaism. And there's probably other groups as well teaching things, because some of the things are definitely not Jewish ideas. So instead of focusing on what these people are teaching and explaining why they're wrong, he looks at it more generally, and he teaches them what they're going to lose if they go chasing after these things, these teachings. And he teaches them why they don't need these things. And we'll look at all of these as we come to them. And he also says that way they and on ourselves, when we apply this to ourselves, can apply this teaching to other false observances. So these people have been teaching man-made observances, and he says, and he's going to give us the information for how to look at these things and how to see that they're not what they are, and they're not, they're godly, even when they look like they're godly, and how we can avoid those. So he starts out in Colossians 2, verse 1, with the idea that he struggles for these people. And he says, "But I want you to know what struggles I have for you, and for those in Laodicea, and for those others who have not seen my face in the flesh." So this is the first sentence of what's going to be a 3-verse long sentence. So I broke it into individual verses, and we'll go through it in pieces. But this is typical of Paul to do really long sentences. Whenever you see a really long sentence, you say, yeah, I'll bet Paul wrote this. But what he says here is that he has 2 things he wants to achieve with this letter that he's sending to the church. And the first one is that he wants to make something known to them, and to others who read the letter, that he struggles for them. He really works for them, and his life is dedicated to making things better for them. So what kind of struggles does he do? What does he mean by struggles? Well, he's not with them, so he wouldn't struggle with them there, but he prays for them. He's glad to hear good news for them, and he's saddened when he hears bad news about them. So he struggles with them in a spiritual sense, where they're always on his mind, they're always on his focus, and he's always anxious to hear stuff about that church, even though he isn't with them, and to learn how they're doing. And so he says that he struggles for them all the time, as he does for all of the churches that he started. And then he's going to start talking about the wealth of the Messiah here. And this is still that same sentence that he's working on. And he says, "And that their hearts may be comforted." So this is the second thing that he's wanting to achieve here. "And that their hearts may be comforted, and that they may approach by love all the wealth of the assurance and understanding of the knowledge of the mystery of God the Father and of the Messiah." Okay, that's a long sentence, like lawyers might like to do. and it's hard to put all the pieces together in that. But what he's saying there is his second goal is to comfort them. He wants them to be comforted by some understanding that he's going to give them. And so with this comfort, he says, they're going to grow in wealth in 2 ways. They're going to grow in assurance, which means in the confidence in the faith. And so he wants to comfort them by understanding that everything's okay, to assure them that everything is fine, they're not doing anything wrong, they don't have to follow on to these teachings that they're being taught. And also, he wants them to grow in their understanding of the knowledge of a mystery, and this mystery is the mystery of God the Father and the Messiah. And this word mystery is used in the Bible a few times like this, And what he really means by it is saying the incomprehensibleness of God the Father and the Messiah and all that that is. And so how do we understand God? Well, we don't understand God completely or anything about that. But he's saying what you will do is you will grow in the wealth of the assurance and the understanding of the knowledge of what God is and the greatness and wonderfulness of God and all those things. So he wants them to grow in these two ways. And to grow, he says they need to be comforted, because right now people are teaching them things that are wrong, and they're saying, well, I don't know if that's right. Is it wrong? I don't know. And so they're not in a comfort situation because these people are teaching them these things. He wants them to be comforted so that they can grow. And so in this, he implies that the growing in understanding brings assurance, which is certainly a true thing. The more you understand about God, the more solid and real he becomes to you, and the more he becomes a foundation for your life. And that's really what he's saying here, is as you grow, the more you learn about God, the more you understand about his ways and who he is and how he acts, the more solid your foundation is going to be. And now he's going to start talking about hidden treasures in the Messiah. And this is still that same sentence continuing on. And he says, him, referring to the Messiah, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. So what he's saying there is wisdom and knowledge are treasures. And they're not the treasures the world seeks after, though. The world seeks after cars and houses and money and gold and all sorts of stuff. And they chase after those things. But he says the treasures that the Messiah offers are wisdom and knowledge, which are better treasures. And you don't really have to think about that a whole lot to understand that. But he also does say they're hidden in the Messiah. And I've mentioned this many times before, is that you need to have an attitude of wanting to search out the Messiah, wanting to learn about him and become closer to him and get closer and understand all of these things about him. And so it's a process, a growth process that happens. And so many Christians run after all sorts of other things, feelings, experiences, and I mentioned wealth of other kinds. But he says that Jesus offers wisdom and knowledge, which the world isn't looking for, really. They're really looking not for guidance or help. They're looking for fun things that they can do and experience in their lives. And so, so in this idea, what he's saying is that we have access to all of these treasures through the Messiah. And later on here, he's saying, he's going to say, you're going to be endangering your access to these treasures. So now he begins talking about the problem that they're having with the false teachings. And he says, but I say this, let no man deceive you with persuasive words. And we were just talking about that, arguments that sound good, but they aren't good. And that is the meaning of sophistry. Sophistry is the use of arguments based on a mistaken belief, especially with the intention of deceiving. And so if someone is teaching you things that are false, and they have as their goal deceiving you into doing these false things. So they want you to be deceived and to do this, and they get something out of it. We don't know what they get out of it, but maybe they just get followers for their beliefs, or maybe they actually expect to get revenue for it. But for some reason or other, they're teaching these false things, and they do intend to deceive people into believing what they believe. So the words that they teach are not biblically sound, but they sound nice, or they appeal to you in some other way. And this is so much a part of our life with the social media. I'm going to pick on Facebook because that's the only social media I'm involved in. But the same things happen in all of the social medias, is that they present all sorts of ideas, and many of them represent themselves as biblical ideas, but they are not biblical ideas. So what you'll often see, and I see so many times, is quotes from the Bible that have been adjusted. If you see a Bible quote on Facebook and you look at it and you say, I don't remember that verse saying quite that. I'll go and look it up, and I'll say, oh, they cut out this little bit and they cut out this little bit. And you'll see that so often that they've shortened it up and adjusted it that way. And so what I will often do is I will take the real verse and paste it onto that post so that people can see what the Bible really says there. And you need to be always vigilant that way. So many good sounding ideas show up on Facebook, but they are not biblical ideas. And another thing to do, whenever you see these things, ask yourself what agenda is behind this post. What are they pushing? What's the background? What's the driving force that caused this person to create this post here? And the common one is selling the idea that you should never criticize anybody. You should never say anything bad about anything that somebody did or about that person. But that's not biblical either. You just have to look at Jesus. He said all sorts of things that offended people, and ultimately they killed him for it. So that's not a biblical idea. Paul talks many times about bringing, if you see someone doing something wrong, talk to that person first. And if you won't go along with that, bring them up before the church and have it explained to them. And so he talks about a process for resolving errors like that. So that's something that happens. That's a common agenda that you'll see, but there are lots of other agendas behind these posts. And so you have to kind of read the post and ask, who's behind this? Or what idea is behind this? What are they selling here? So, and before sharing a post, always think about what it says. And sometimes you have to look pretty closely because the ideas sound good, and sometimes they're very close to biblical ideas, but there's just a little error in there. So always you need to be watchful about that and ask yourself, is this a biblical idea that I'm seeing on Facebook? Is this something I want to share and represent by sharing?
But unfortunately, a lot of times people, especially people with Facebook, many times they'll see that and say, oh, I forgot a word or maybe a couple of words, but they won't go search for it.
Yeah.
They'll just say, oh, they just forgot it.
That's right.
They don't mean anything that.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality of laziness, of just accepting, go along to get along, and not making any ways you're okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not being watchful. And a watchful person always looks at these things and says, is this true? Is this right? And watchfulness is critical. The idea that you have to be the person who is the one, you need to be Paul to yourself, the person who tells you what's right and wrong. You need to understand the Bible well enough that you can do that.
Or you can, I hate the ones where they say, if you afford this to all your friends, everybody's going to get a secret money or something or other.
Boy, those are all over the place. And I know Christians who fall for that every time.
Yeah.
How does that often go? You will receive money from God 10 days from now if you say amen to this post. Please, people, do you know God at all?
Like God says, okay, who else? Who else we got here?
Check this Facebook. Who said?
Yeah. Some that are so blatant like that, you should just be able to say, that's a silly idea. But there are a lot more that are much trickier than that, and they represent ideas that are close to biblical, but they're just a shade off. And the idea is to shade you away. Little tiny steps pull you away. So anyway, social media is really bad. Because there's a lot of people in there who are actively trying to deceive.
I know you have to take responsibility, and maybe I have to be more careful myself. I think I was sharing something, and my cousin, she said no, and then she started like, kind of, did you know the Bible says this? And I just let go because I said I don't want to go into an argument or anything. But just. Again, I'm having a lot of relatives right now. They're my friends and they're pastors.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the case of this cousin, the brother, he's a pastor, and then I have another one, and he's just like, it's just a little challenging to share something because that might start an argument. Like,
well,
you don't want to get in an argument either.
Yeah, well, as long as you've checked it and it is biblical, go ahead and share it. And if somebody says, hey, that's wrong, then that's your opportunity to say, no, this is what the Bible says. Yeah. So that can be a good thing if you use it correctly, but make sure it's a biblical idea. And as I said, so many of the things that you see there aren't. Okay, Paul, continuing on, he says how he rejoices in hearing about them and the things that they've done. And he says, for though I am separated from you in the flesh, yet I am with you in the spirit. And I rejoice to see your organization and the stability of your faith, which is in the Messiah. So he says wonderful things about them. I'm hearing great things about you. You're doing a wonderful job. And he said earlier that he struggles for them in the spirit, and he obviously is getting news about how they're doing. And he's happy to say here how they're working together as a group and how their faith is unshaken. Nothing is causing in any way to fall away from the faith. And so he's saying all these things to kind of encourage them and to give them comfort, which he said was one of his goals here. And so he's trying to remove that discomfort that they're suffering from because of the teachings that they've heard. And so the next thing he says is basically walk the way you started. And so he says, therefore, just as you have received Yeshua the Messiah, our Lord, walk in him. So Paul wants them to continue to walk in the same way that they were taught when they accepted Jesus. And that's really a key verse here. I've talked about chiasms before, and this is the center verse out of a chiasm that's in there. And I won't go into any depths on that, but the center verse is kind of, the chiasm is a way of focusing you on a central point. And this is his central point, is walk the way you started. Just the way you received Jesus the Messiah, when I told you about him and taught you all about him, continue, walk in that way. And don't be changing anything. I told you everything you needed to know. Just stay that way. Don't listen to these other people who are trying to tell you other things in other ways. So that's his central message here, is walk the way you started. And so with that, he's saying, this is the solution to the problem. And also, your start was good. Don't walk in any new way. Don't have people, or don't pay any attention to people who are teaching you about walking in a new way that I didn't teach you about. And so it really means something that we hear about in other places in the Bible, which is don't be blown around by every wind that comes, every little false teaching that comes. Don't be blown around by that, and don't be discomforted by that. I want you to be comforted so that you will continue to grow as you should grow. Now, should we walk the way we started? That's Paul's message to the Colossians, but that was the church that he started. And so he wants them to continue to walk in Jesus the same way as when they accepted him. But is that also a message for us in our time? And I doubt that. I don't think so. Because in our time, most Christians don't get the same kind of start that his church got. They were being taught by an apostle. An apostle was somebody special. And they were being taught all the right things. But we don't see that in the churches now. There are lots of churches teaching bad things. And so our churches weren't started by apostles. Some churches have worse doctrine than others, of course. Some are closer. Cogs Heaven had some bad doctrine in the past that they fixed. They may still have some. But how do we know? Where is an apostle who can tell us if our doctrine is off? Well, we don't have that. And so who knows? New Christians are raised in false doctrine right from the beginning. But they're raised in that's the only thing they've ever been taught. So they think that that's true doctrine, but it isn't. And they don't know any better than that because they were raised that way always. So the Colossian church was very different that way. And so for every Christian growing up, you need to have that attitude of maybe I didn't get good doctrine and maybe I need to start looking at other things and reading the Bible more closely and getting to understand what is really there rather than what the church is teaching. And so that means that we need to be prepared to sometimes throw away the things that we were taught and grasp the new good things that we can see in the Bible. But how can they know that when every week they're taught the wrong things at their church? So it's always been a struggle.
Stan, there's also a trend that is going around, and it's been going on for some years now, maybe the last 5 years or more. And I found out about it because, unlike what I should have done before, I was trying to communicate with another pastor in a small church in our area to find out exactly what their beliefs were, which is what I should have asked about NHU before, but that's a different story. I mean, we all believe in God and all that. No, it's not the same thing. So anyway, and I like this fellow, and I knew his dad pretty well, so I thought this would be a good thing to see if we can get together and maybe make one group. And turns out that he said he was with a new custom of dialing back the doctrine of the Church of God to 1980 something or other.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, well, brief me on that. What is that about? Basically, they don't believe Jesus is the Son of God. And I said, well, wait a minute. He is the Son of God. Well, he's the Son of God, but he's not a God. So I didn't even know that there was a time when the Church of God believed that Jesus was not divine, that he's an ordinary man that died on the cross and then he went to heaven and whatever. So there was a number of different things like that, and he says, this is going bad. I said, I don't think this is going to work out at all. I mean, not even a little bit.
Yeah.
I said, okay, because I've been told, like I can even tell you right off the bat, okay, so and of course, when he told me they believe in Christmas, then we had a serious problem there. Anyway, so when they put, he says, so I told him, so this man not only dies on the cross, but actually resurrects, and he saved millions of lives. That's an ordinary man. You think you or I could do that? No. Well, you know, this is what they believe, and I'm going along with it. I said, oh, so you're not really the leader of the church? Well, I sort of am, but I just kind of go along with whatever they think is best.
Yeah.
I said, no, this is not a good way of doing things at all.
Yeah, that's not rolling back the doctrine of the church.
Yeah,
That's
they
going
call
off.
it rolling back the clock or dialing back the doctrine or something.
Well,
They're-
I think that we cannot credit everything to the church, because through the years I had noticed, like, people, they're coming up with new ideas, and there's been a lot of divisions,
Mhm.
because even in Mexico, and it's because it's nothing from God, it's mostly like mental, like a person that was, let's start doing this.
Yes.
Like, I remember before we used to sing mostly mostly we stick on hymns, but then they started molding about little, singing other songs, and then I found out that some of the songs that we're singing is the same songs that the Catholic Church sings.
Yeah.
And then for them, so I'm thinking, like, there's always like someone trying to bring, like, let's do this,
Yeah.
And so I guess we're living the same time that the Apostle Paul, the people trying to bring human thoughts.
Yeah.
And there's always like Paul saying, no, don't be persuaded for this. And I think as the time goes, we might have to go through more.
Yeah, some things never change. People don't change. And so what is happening here with the church in Colossae is the same thing that happens everywhere, is that people bring in their own ideas about how things should be done. And they start introducing them as they should be doctrine, but they're not doctrine. They're not Bible-based. Okay, so what we need to do is and this is Paul's real message here, is we need to cling to the Messiah and seek his wealth and nothing else. And that really means, when you come down to it, reading the Bible and understanding and letting God show you what he means and what the verses are saying. So Paul's message continues here. He said he wants them to grow stronger in the faith, and he touched on that before a little bit, and now he's going to do that some more. He's going to be using a tree to symbolize their growth. And so he says, strengthening your roots while you are being built up in him, and you are being established in that faith which you have learned, which may you now abound with thanksgiving. So he's saying there is I want you to grow stronger. I want you to build up your roots, and we know what the roots are. The roots are the Bible-based ideas that we have. And while you strengthen those roots, I want you to grow like a tree does. So when a tree grows, it grows bigger roots at the same time it's starting to grow as a bigger tree. And he's saying, I want you to do that. I want you to grow in your roots, and I want you to grow in what you are. And I want you to become established, and like a strong tree that has a good grip on the earth and can't be moved. I want you to become established in the faith in that way. So he's using a tree to symbolize what he wants the Colossian church to become. And so this verse echoes the idea from verse 5 earlier, where he talked about them being organized and stable, and he wants them to continue on doing that. Now, he does say something interesting here. He says, that faith that you learned, and that means doctrine. The word faith is used in two ways in the Bible. One is having faith, which is to trust in God and to believe in him and to have that relationship with him. But it's also used in the way that you see here. He talks about in that faith. And so in that faith, we have the word doctrine for that. So in that faith means what you have understood and put into words and understandings of how everything works, how God works, how salvation works, all of those things. That is part of doctrine. So when he says the faith you have learned, he's talking about doctrine that you've learned as you've grown up in the faith. Now, he's going to get more to the point here about these false teachers. And he says, beware lest any man rob you by philosophy or by empty deception, according to the teaching of men and according to the principles of the world, and not according to the Messiah. So that goes back to what we were just saying, people teaching what they think rather than what's actually in the Bible. So this is echoing a verse from earlier where he began to speak about these false teachers who were coming in amongst them and teaching things that were their own ideas. And he also refers back to the hidden wealth that he said was hidden in the Messiah. So when he says rob you, he's saying that these people, if you follow after them, you will lose the wealth that you have in the Messiah. And so there's really a loss that is involved in chasing after these false ideas. And so he says, don't let these people steal that wealth from you. And then the same applies to us. His time is no different than ours in this way. There are lots of people trying to deceive us and get us to do things that aren't biblical. So this idea of being robbed by false teachings, how can we be robbed of the wealth of the Messiah? What is it that happens that causes us to be robbed? What do you think about that?
I think they're trying to keep us away from God.
Mm-hmm.
Because you believe a false doctrine, you're not following God because you're just going
Mm-hmm.
the wrong way.
What happens within us when that happens? How do we
It
change?
creates confusion.
Confusion, that's part of it, for sure. Yeah. And he's talking about that being discomforted by the teachings that they're hearing.
Instead of having peace, you feel like sort of like aggravated,
Mm-hmm.
instead of.
Yeah.
That's my personal feeling.
Yeah.
I don't know how the people feel.
Yeah, it changes the focus of our lives. It really causes us to lose the focus on the Messiah, and he's going to get to talking about that more and more as he goes along here. And turning our focus away onto other things. And these people who are teaching them these other things want the people to focus on these other things and lose their focus on the Messiah.
I think a lot of the focus today in a lot of the churches, even some churches of God, is they want to have this feel good in feeling,
Yeah.
They don't care about, oh, did I learn anything today? It was more like, oh, we really felt great today, we really got emotional, we
Mhm.
really felt touched and the whole bit. I mean, you can do that from a great movie too, you can do that by going shopping and finding some really good sales or something,
Yeah.
But if you go by that, you will be distracted from what really matters.
Right.
And the wealth of the Messiah to me is the blessings that he gives people that are not out there for a cheap thrill of some kind, that
Right.
that is just going to get them emotionally charged. I saw that happening in the previous church a lot, and I was really turned off by that. I was really upset about that. But you just get run over by that and that excitement.
Yeah, and so many people are looking for that emotional charged message. They're looking for a speaker who waves his arms and presents and says wonderful things and all that drama all going on. That's what they're looking for. But what he says doesn't so much matter to them. They're just there for the show. The show. Yeah. So you're robbed because your focus is distracted and turned to other things that it shouldn't be on and turned away from the Messiah. And so Paul is saying that the wealth of wisdom and understanding that is in the Messiah can be reduced to you, are limited by these teachings of men. So if you begin to follow after these things, your focus turns away and you begin to have less access to the wisdom and understanding that is in the Messiah that he talked about before. So, and you're going to see later on as we go into this more that he's talking about these teachers who are largely teaching false observances. They're teaching additions to the observances that the people are keeping. And so in our time, there's things like Easter and Christmas and all the other stuff there. So these things pull our focus away from God. So even though they might say, oh, Easter is all about God. No, it isn't. Or they say Christmas, that's a wonderful time. That's all about Jesus, baby born and all that sort of stuff. No, it's not biblical. You're being pulled away. And so again, we're seeing that idea that things that sound good and godly even are things that can pull you away because they really aren't. And so what we're going to be seeing more of in Paul's teaching here is he's going to be talking about these observances that are taught by men. And so we need to understand that they're not benign. If we start following after those things, they will limit us. They will limit our growth in the faith. They will confuse our doctrine. They will cause all sorts of problems with us. So we need to be certain not to follow after those ideas. But we need also to be not arrogant. There are always people, Pastor has done a sermon a couple times on this about different levels of Christians. And there are people who are up here and there are people who are down here, and we should never be condescending to those who are are those who aren't as strong in the faith or aren't as strong in the doctrine. We should always be there to try and help them grow and have that attitude towards them. And we're really only different from those people who are not as far in the doctrine or in the faith as we are, because God made us people who could let go of the bad things and could say, this is wrong, it's not biblical, I'm throwing it away, I'm going to get rid of it, and instead I'm going to go with what the Bible says. And so we are a people who have been able to do that. We've been able to look at the Bible and say, that doesn't line up with what this church is teaching. I need a new church, or I need to go someplace or do something else. And so, but that isn't us that did that. That's God made us people who could do that. But there are other people who hold on to these things and they can't let go of them as easily as we have. So another question I wanted to bring up is, what makes a teaching persuasive? And the answers, I think, are pretty obvious here. They appeal to your sense of authority, one of them, and I have a good quote here. It says, in our day, as in the ancient world, people often measure the value of what others say by how well they say it. Even within the church, we put great stress on a person's academic credentials, as if a PhD granted one a corner on heavenly wisdom. That happens so much. We've talked about pastor worship before, and it's easy to be tricked into that. Just talking about the dramatic preacher, it sounds like with all that drama, he must be teaching the right thing, but he may not be. And the other appeal is appealing to what you want to believe about God and doctrine. So a lot of these teachers are out there, and they'll come around teaching the false things. And if you have a desire that lines up with what they're teaching, you're in danger there. You may think, oh, that sounds good to me. And then you will forget to say, what does the Bible say? And so we have our own internal weaknesses that make us susceptible to some of these teachings. And so we always need to be aware of whether it's really us that is being served by this teaching, or whether it's really God being served by this teaching. And so ultimately, you are the weak point in all of this. You need to be watchful always, as we were saying earlier. Okay, so summarizing this, and we'll be done quickly. We'll continue on next week with this. This is just the first module. So he says, I want you to know that I struggle for you. And he loves to hear news about the church in Colossae. He wants to hear good things, but sometimes he hears bad things. And he's heard about these teachings that are going around in the church. And he wants to, he's written this epistle to get them so that they don't fall for that. And he also says, I want you to be comforted so that you can grow in the wealth of the understanding and wisdom that is hidden in the Messiah. And we broke that down into what he means by that. And so he wants them to be comforted so they can grow. And he says, do not be deceived by persuasive words. And that's really been the focus here, is people who come in with words that sound good. They sound like they even sound godly. They sound like they're based in the Bible, but they really aren't based in the Bible. And so his solution to that is continue to walk in the way of Jesus. And that's really his central point, as I mentioned. But for us, that it can't be that way, because we weren't brought up in a perfect with perfect teachings in a church that taught perfect teachings, and so we can't continue in the way that we were brought up. We can only continue to walk in the way of Jesus, and we do that by reading the Bible to see the way of Jesus. So, and he says that he wants them to continue to walk in this way, to strengthen their roots, to grow up the trunk of the tree and become established like a big tree. And so finally, what he said was, be watchful that no one robs you of your wealth using high-sounding words, fancy ideas, new ideas, appealing ideas that appeal in whatever way, and always being watchful and careful for these things. So any other questions, comments?
There's a verse in Romans, I think, where Paul says that he didn't come to them with very elevated or eloquent words. I can't remember exactly how it goes, but the gist of it was simply that he spoke to them in very plain speech, because he didn't want to attract anything to him and distract from the glory of the Lord.